Hi students, welcome to our tutorial video for week 2, lesson 2, and today we've been looking at analysing voice and the links of character voice to character background. So you have been through this PowerPoint presentation where I have explained to you the links between character voice and the different components of character voice and what they reveal about a character's background, such as their class, their level of education, and the effects of geography on their patterns of language use, also their ethnic, racial identity and effect as well. And you've also watched these 2 videos which build upon those concepts and get into some detail about it, and really this lesson has been focused on linguistics and how patterns of language use vary between different social groups and across different times and places. Alright, so we're at activity 1 and you're watching the tutorial video here, and what we're going to be doing in this tutorial video is analysing those links between the work that we've done previously, where we identified different patterns of language use of the character Jasper Jones, and now we're going to think about what those patterns of language use indicate about the character's background. So this is our prompt for our analysis. So what do these patterns of language use possibly indicate about Jasper Jones' background or his social and cultural background? And we know that we want to think about his patterns of language use and what they reveal about these different factors here. Okay, and something important to remember about all this though, as I stated in the lesson goal, okay, we need to think about how his patterns of language use may reflect social and cultural background. So when people speak, okay, we make assumptions about their social and cultural background based upon their patterns of language use. Okay, so their use of particular words, phrases, colloquialisms, their syntax and grammar, their use of profanity, but also their accent, the dialect with which they speak, or the Creole in which they speak as well. Okay, so we want to look at those different patterns of language use of Jasper Jones and then link them to what they indicate about his background. Alright, so this video won't be too long, but let's get stuck into it. Okay, so mispronounced word and effect of accent. Okay, so we've identified here that he, when he speaks, okay, he abbreviates some of his words, particularly words that end with G, or verbs. Okay, so that might be an effect of accent, but also he mispronounces a lot of words as well. So what do they indicate about his background, social, cultural background? Okay, so they reflect where he has grown up, and you know, his accent is reflective of the fact that he's an Australian. It might also be reflective to some extent of his cultural background as an Aboriginal Australian as well. Accent, cultural background as an Indigenous Australian or mixed descent, Indigenous Australian. Could also reflect a low education status. So we know that in that time and place, Aboriginal children often were not educated in the same way as children from a European background were. We also know that in the 1960s and before that time in Australia, Aboriginal children were quite often given inferior education, and many were institutionalised during the stolen generation as well. So his mispronunciation of words and his accent may affect a low education status. Also, could also reflect values and beliefs of family, and also the fact that as a child he was neglected. So as children, you know, quite often we have parents who, will correct us when we mispronounce a word or when we use incorrect grammar and syntax. And that is part of the learning process as we grow. And if a child does not have, parents that, potentially care enough to do that, or don't value the patterns of language use that their children are using, or try to correct them on it, that could be a particular value or belief of the family, or it might also reflect the low educational status of his parents as well, or the fact that he might have been neglected. So we can make assumptions, and that's what they are. They're assumptions, but we do also know a lot about this character, about what this pattern of language use might indicate about his background. But it is important that when we're observing the patterns of language use of an individual that we don't necessarily know, that we don't necessarily make strong assumptions about their background based upon their patterns of language use. Okay, because it's not good to make assumptions about anyone. Okay, so profanity, what could that reflect? That could reflect his class status and also values and beliefs of his family. Could also just be about his age. So Jasper and Jeffrey, they both use profanity a lot and swear a lot as well when they're around each other. Not so much in front of their parents though, except for Jeffrey, he does swear in front of his mother. But his frequent use of profanity could reflect his class status, as a working class or lower class, or from a family, lower class or working class family. And also, it could also indicate that the values and beliefs of his family who have not corrected him on the use of that language. So it could reflect that about his background as well. Could also just be an effect of his age. Alright, so this one here is incorrect grammar in the syntax. Okay, so that one definitely does reflect his class status. It could also reflect the poor educational opportunities that he has been given, and the fact that he can't correctly compose or order his words or syntax in the right way could impact his poor educational opportunities and low educational status. Okay, so his use of colloquialisms, there's one there that's particularly important, and that is the use of white fella. That term is endogenous, meaning that it comes from Aboriginal English, or the Aboriginal Creoles of English that exist in Australia. And he uses that term, and it's a term that sort of entered the wider Australian language and lexicon from the Aboriginal English Creole. So that one could reflect his racial or ethnic background as an Aboriginal boy. This one as well, use of colloquialisms. That also just reflects his Australian identity. And a lot of colloquialisms are also associated with, the working class in this country as well. So the use of colloquialisms is far more accepted in, working class contexts than it is in, upper class academic contexts, for example. Okay, so there we go. We've had a look at his patterns of language, and identified his patterns of language use, and then we've thought about what these patterns of language use possibly indicate about him as a character. Okay, and the analysis that we've done suggests that his use of mispronounced words and the effects of his accent reflect where he's grown up as an Australian, and also his cultural background as a mixed descent Indigenous Australian boy. Could also reflect his low education status and the values and beliefs of his family, and that his language is not being corrected by his parents growing up, which could reflect his neglect as a child. His use of profanity could be indicative of his class status, as the use of profanity generally is more widely, or in the past has been more widely accepted amongst people of the working class, and a lot of profane words have originated amongst working class dialects and creoles. Could also reflect the values and beliefs of his family, and the common usage amongst the people that he's grown up around. Could also just reflect his age, because Jeffrey and also Charlie frequently use profanity as well. And profanity is not a pattern of language use that is strictly located within the working class. However, linguistic studies have shown us that a lot of profanity or profane words or swearing originate in working class dialects. So his incorrect grammar or syntax, that definitely is reflective of the educational opportunities that he's been given as an Indigenous boy, and his relatively low educational status. It also reflects most likely his class status and the lack of values around education that he's probably grown up with in his family. His use of colloquialisms, some of those reflect his racial ethnic background and maybe his familiarity with some Aboriginal Creoles or Aboriginal English dialects, and also just more broadly his Australian identity and his working class background, as use of colloquialisms very much has emanated or originated here in Australia amongst the working class and the dialects that they have created in this country. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this tutorial video. Don't forget that you do have this activity 2 to complete, where you have to write a basic body paragraph in response to this question. Make sure you email that to me as well. And I'll see you in lesson 3 for this week.